During the course of a single year, at least 1 in 5 people suffers a mental illness or brain disorder. What's it like to lose control of your mind? How can you find help? Join us now as patients and families tell the stories of their fight to escape the fires of the mind.
What makes us really human is our love of being around people, our desire to have emotional connection with people. And that seems not to be something that's there even from the earliest years of autism.
Just imagine living in a world where it's sort of like being locked inside the speaker at a rock concert and having the light show going on at the same time.
He would be pulling his own hair, hitting himself, falling down, banging his head on something, because it was like he wanted to punish himself.
I don't know what he's thinking. He can't tell me what he wants for breakfast, let alone if he loves me, if he's mad at me. And I would give anything to know what he's thinking. It's like, I feel like Dove is in jail.
Derived from the Greek word for self, autism is a brain disorder that causes children to withdraw so completely, only the self remains. Symptoms include staring at objects in a trance-like state. Children with autism often stimulate themselves for hours on end, sometimes by flapping their hands rhythmically. Many suffer poor motor control and have trouble manipulating objects and maintaining balance. Fits of temper can last for hours or days. And many children are often super sensitive to touch. Even a gentle hug can be intolerable. And sounds we pay little attention to become unbearable tortures. Autism is 4 times more prevalent in boys than girls and knows no racial, ethnic, or social bounds. It attacks 1 out of 500 children in America, usually around the age of 1 or 2. In California, the number of diagnosed autism cases is growing at an alarming rate, up 273% over the last 10 years.
The question comes up, is the incidence of autism really increasing, or is it that we're better at diagnosing? Clearly, part of the problem is that we're better at diagnosing.
Some autistic children grow up to join the workforce. Others require a lifetime of constant supervision.
One parent said the following to me. She said, "It was as if someone broke into their house at night, stole their child's mind and soul, and left a helpless body behind." She said if 1 in 500 children in the United States were actually being kidnapped, they would declare it a national emergency.
The loss of a child's mind is as painful as it is bewildering for parents.
Good?
Once affectionate children become strangers.
Good talking?
Come here.
12 years ago, Portia and John of Los Angeles had their first child, a son. They named him Dove, the Yiddish word for bear.
Within actually 8 weeks after he was born, he began to have what I thought were some serious medical problems, and nobody could really tell me what was wrong.
Around 2 years old, Dove's symptoms became pronounced.
He used to run to greet us at the door, and he wasn't doing that anymore. I would find him just staring out the window at the, motes of dust in the sunlight.
And it wasn't too long after that that we realized we could literally bang pot lids behind his head and he wouldn't respond.
It's almost as if Dove is in prison. And if you want to be with him, you have to get in prison too. And that means you have to get very small and very soft and very slow, and maybe you'll get a second.
It was as if he were entering into a world of his own and he couldn't hear what I was saying.
So we said, well, what's medicine have to offer? And there must be something. Who's doing the latest, the cutting edge, the most fancy research? And we dove into it, and the answer was nobody.
They founded an organization called Cure Autism Now, or CAN. Its goal is to encourage scientific research.
So on this.
Good. Okay, let's see how you look.
Recently, Portia has learned firsthand how children with autism react to events around them as compared to normal children like Anya.
I'm going to wrap these around your...
In this informal demonstration, a portable device detects what's known as skin conductivity response.
So there's a little tiny...
Sensors attached to Anya's fingers monitor a division of the nervous system that regulates activity in the sweat glands in her skin. To create a response in the instrument, Anya squeezes the operator's finger.
Squeeze really hard.
On the monitor, the line tracking Anya's response peaks briefly but quickly subsides.
Goes around like this.
Dove is tested next.
Such a good boy.
Dove's response shoots off the screen.
And these things are exactly...
While Anya's nervous system, seen on the right, is stable, Dove's resembles how a normal person would react to an earthquake, as opposed to a quiet room.
Not as many of these spikes.
Well, we think a part of the brain called the amygdala is playing a role in producing these responses, and that seems to be a very important part of the brain which detects significance of events.
Using three-dimensional images of autistic brains, researchers like Eric Corshane have discovered that regions of the brain, like the amygdala and the cerebellum, are underdeveloped. Through computer-assisted measurement techniques, the entire cerebellum has been shown to be smaller than normal. One function of the cerebellum is to help prioritize incoming information from the outside world.
Very often, an autistic person shows abilities and disabilities that are side by side. An incredible ability to perhaps focus their attention and pick up little details of information, but at the expense of picking up information more broadly. So oftentimes they'll pick up details but miss the big picture.
The brain does much of its detail work in the higher learning and memory centers. In autism, these areas are often larger than normal.
So you have sometimes people with really pretty extraordinary rote memory or even artistic skill, but they're side by side with the inability to use language effectively in communicating or make friendships.
In Los Angeles, Jay and Kathleen Fisher watched their family life unravel when autism attacked their son, James.
It puts an enormous amount of stress on a marriage. I've dealt with it mostly by denial. This isn't something that's, this isn't happening, this isn't true, this isn't right. Kathy dealt with it probably a lot more personally.
I mean, I think I was in shock. I was definitely clinically depressed. I cried every day for months, and it was really, really difficult for me, and I had a really hard time adjusting, and I felt a huge loss, and like someone had just ripped my gut open.
The Fishers have two sons. The oldest, Jason, is normal. But his brother James was struck by autism 3 years ago.
He's got low muscle tone hypotonia in his mouth. And so any kind of blowing or kissing, actually, is good exercise, too, so we practice that a lot.
The challenges and frustrations of the Fishers are shared by 400,000 families across America. Finding the right professional help and just getting a child to regular therapy sessions can be an ordeal.
It was just physically exhausting for me. I'd have to take him from, I'd have to go about 150 yards to get him to speech therapy, and he would fall down on the ground. We'd take a step, he'd fall down on the ground. I'd have to lift him up. We'd take a step, he'd fall down on the ground. He was screaming and crying, and I'm trying to lift him up, and I'm sweating and crying, and it would just go on like that. Everything, everywhere we went, everything.
For the past 2 years, Jason has sat at his brother's side through countless visits to specialists and therapy sessions, never letting go of a simple dream.
I wish that he can talk. That's what I really want to wish for. Maybe when he gets a little older, he can talk like me.
This is cornstarch. Even before he was diagnosed, so when he was like 2 years old or less than 2 years old, he was always playing with flour and loved, playing with flour. Now, after he's had a long day at school, especially at UCLA where he's 6 hours, he'll come home, take off his clothes, and just go right into this. It's very soothing for him.
You ready to work, James? Here we go.
Kathleen enrolled James in a diagnostic program at the University of California, Los Angeles.
What's that? What is that?
Here, B.J. Freeman finds the best way to help James learn.
Look, what's this? What is that? A child like James, he can say things. He's just not motivated to do it. And the trick for him, and the problem is going to be to figure out what's going to motivate him to communicate with us, which is where the visuals sometimes come in for the children. Ow! Very good, James.
Like many children with autism, James responds more strongly to visual cues than to verbal ones.
Scissors. What's that? Hammer. Right. What do you do with a hammer? Show me. Do you hammer?
Therapists will build on his preference for pictures to expand his communication skills.
Look. What's this? Look. Normal children learn speech by repeating, but what we see often in autistic children is they get kind of stuck at just repeating stage. So our next step with James is to get over that hurdle, and he's starting to get there by saying some appropriate things.
While James is making progress, his inability to communicate verbally can lead to tantrums.
We don't hit. We don't hit people.
It used to be that autistic children like James had little hope of joining society. As late as the 1980s, most parents were advised by doctors to institutionalize their children for life.
Children were placed in large institutions, large state holding tanks, literally speaking, where there were hundreds and hundreds of children and youth and adults, and went nowhere.
In 1966, Dr. O. Ivar Lovas was on staff at UCLA's Neuropsychiatric Institute when he was asked to consult at a local mental ward. Despite the efforts of well-meaning staff, autistic children were beating themselves almost to death.
The person would be sort of hitting himself on the eyes till the detached retinas, or beating their heads to the ears were full of blood, and maybe hitting the kidneys, so there were derivative of blood in the urine, and that was just about fatal. So what the child or a person was saying essentially, I don't know how to talk, so I'm going to beat myself. And as we started working with them, trying to teach them some ways of communicating without beating themselves to death, we found out that many of them were really quite smart, and that the diagnosis of severe mental retardation and idiocy and all that, severe brain damage and irreversible pathology, it just didn't apply that well. So there were inspirations from the very beginning that there was some hope here. Now,
Lovas took on a mission most experts considered hopeless.
sit down. Sit down.
Over the next 20 years, he crafted a method of teaching autistic children.
Oh, that's good sitting. Yeah.
It's a system used at the Ron Leaf School in Seal Beach, California. To help children focus on learning, their progress is constantly reinforced and rewarded in repetitive tasks. Therapists entice children to form sentences and use numbers. A clear response is instantly reinforced with praise.
Very nice. Austin, how many beans do you want?
2 beans.
Pretty good. How many do you want, Steve?
2 beans.
Very nice. Count.
1, 2.
All right, don't spill the beans. 1, 2. Nice job.
And this is more than a game of catch. Rick Schroeder uses reinforcements and rewards to help Kyle learn his numbers and to interact with others.
Okay, Kyle. Bring it back. Come on.
Kyle knows he'll get the ball only on the count of 3. Rick stops at 1, leaving it up to Kyle to finish saying 2 and 3.
Here we go. 1. Oh, listen. 1. Good talking. What a catch!
Kyle is rewarded with the ball and a well-earned hug.
Good job. All right.
Many children with autism seem to be unable to integrate information entering the brain through the senses of sight, sound, taste, smell, and touch. Researchers believe one source of the problem may lie in a drastic loss of specialized cells in the cerebellum called Purkinje neurons. Purkinje neurons are part of the mechanism that allows us to take information that is heard, felt, or seen, make associations between them all, and make predictions about what's likely to happen next. Robbed of these neurons, some autistic people have trouble with physical coordination and simple motor tasks.
Can you sit down?
To compensate for brain abnormalities, they may be using parts of the brain normally devoted to abstract or cognitive thinking for tasks like walking.
As they use this cognitive energy for things that should be automatic, they don't have any cognitive energy left to focus on the things that they need to learn.
At the Temple Grandin School in Phoenix, Arizona, therapists believe sensory exercises stimulate autistic brains to function more normally. Spinning forces Kate's brain to make hundreds of tiny adjustments to keep her body on the platform. Since there's too much going on here for the conscious brain to manage, the exercise may coax subconscious regions to take on the task. As a result, the cognitive or thinking areas of the brain may be freed to function more normally.
It's time to sing hello, 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 hello.
These sensory exercises are the mainstay of a 2-week program called Chris's Camp.
We're going to sing hello to everybody this morning, and when it's your turn, you get to play the drum.
Autistic kids receive daily one-on-one therapy. Meanwhile, parents and siblings get a much-needed break in the scenic mountain town of Idlewild, California.
You try it, Clay.
By the end of the session, Clay has made some strides.
he's more apt to do academic kinds of tasks while he's engaged in sensory activities than he is if you were to give him a paper and pencil.
Ready?
That doesn't hold the same kind of interest for him.
Clay is normally overstimulated by his surroundings,
Will you help me write Scooby-Doo?
but the sensation of shaving cream is so calming, his brain is able to focus on the board to learn his alphabet.
Scoo. Can you make an O? Here.
Before Chris's camp, Clay was barely able to communicate with his family.
Well, I think he knows that I'm his mother, but he never called me his mother. And he didn't call his dad either, and he never called his siblings by name.
But as the program came to a close, Clay had something new to say.
Last night was a unique experience when he said, "Mom," and I turned around and that's Clay calling me. And then he said the same thing. He said, "Dad," and he went around the circle and he touched everybody's face and said everybody's name. And this morning I thought, I'm going to try this again, and he did the same thing again this morning.
Families who live with autism wage a day-in, day-out struggle. For Jeanette and Lee Darlington, these challenges were doubled. Jeanette gave birth to 2 sons, both autistic. Evan was born in 1981. Before Evan was diagnosed, Glenn was born 3 years later.
Here, hold that.
I was getting help for Evan, and Glenn was just this bright, happy kid. And when I realized that Glenn had a language delay, I was devastated. Evan didn't talk. He didn't understand what people said. He didn't answer to his own name.
Both of the children were that way
for
a long time.
And I missed.
Having 2 kids with autism, we really sort of concluded on our own that there was a genetic likelihood there.
Don't damage the pool table, please.
To shed light on whether their autism is coincidental or has a genetic basis, Glenn and Evan are participating in a project that may resolve the issue. Researchers at UCLA and other institutions are combing through an estimated 100,000 genes to uncover a handful that may contribute to autism.
We really need families like the Darlington family. Without that, this research can't happen. We will start to study pieces of DNA located throughout the genome in these pairs of autistic children. By studying the pieces of DNA and asking the question, are they shared more often than you would expect for siblings? With that information, we can start to hone in on a particular region in the human genome that might harbor a susceptibility gene.
Identifying genes linked to autism may allow doctors in the future to identify children at risk before the onset of the disorder. New drugs might also be developed that will target specific forms of autism. Research associate Lori Crawford has a personal stake in this genetic quest.
My son is autistic, and so is my sister. I'm here because I really believe that we're going to come up with some answers in the next couple of years, and I want to be a part of that, and I want to help my son and my sister and everyone's child, too.
Genetics may also help us understand the extraordinary variations of autism.
We are totally different. Like I'm quiet, he can be loud. He has a lot of energy, and I'm not.
Sometimes it is a bit hard to communicate him because of his shyness, but most of the time he's somewhat open, in fact. If I ask him politely, he'll tell me about quite a few things, some of which can't be said in this documentary, but still.
Years ago, Evan's mother drew cartoons about everyday events to help him understand written words and how they described real situations. While the exercises helped, he still has problems with expressing his experiences through writing. Evan has no trouble telling his grandma about a recent vacation, but recounting the same trip by writing words on paper would be extremely difficult.
It's like English is a second language, and he doesn't have a first language. And with Evan, I see him getting through high school. I still see Glenn going to college. In fact, actually, I could see Glenn getting a PhD because academically he's fine.
Glenn Darlington began to read words at the age of 2.
We could tell Glenn, sit down, and nothing would happen. It's like the words didn't exist. But we could write him a note. Glenn, sit down, and show it to him. He'd sit down.
Okay, let's go back, 15 feet.
Given their progress, there's little doubt that Glenn and Evan will go on to join the growing ranks of autistic people in the workplace. Autistic people can have an amazing talent for certain tasks. When Eileen Ehrenberg found she liked office work, she developed her skills to a breathtaking level of efficiency. She types 120 words a minute, roughly twice the speed of an average professional secretary.
People come in sometime, and they can't believe how fast I type. They can look at me so fast, and then they'll start fainting. Boom. And let me tell you something, I do get a kick out of it. It's fun.
The biggest challenge facing Eileen's boss is keeping up with her.
I find it hard keeping her busy because the quicker I give her something, she's done. And she'll come out and she'll look at me, she says, I'm done, what else? And I have to stop my job and I have to get up and try to go find her more work.
Eileen works at UCLA helping track grant money donated to the university.
Okay, thank
you.
With hundreds of thousands of dollars at stake, it's vital that important letters get to generous donors quickly. When letters are returned due to incorrect addresses, Eileen comes to the rescue. She has memorized hundreds of zip codes for towns and cities across the United States. She can readdress a box full of mail in a few hours, a task that would take anyone else a day or two. Eileen was placed here by a nonprofit organization called J. Nolan Community Services. Case managers like Rebecca check in on her weekly.
She learns things more visually. So when I'm talking to her or counseling her about a certain issue, I'll write things down for her and make little pictures.
To this end, Rebecca's put up cue cards to help Eileen remember to slow down now and then. But when day is done, Eileen needs no cue cards to find her way home. Like many productive autistic people, Eileen has learned to navigate in the outside world.
Let's look at the 5 summer outfits you got, hon.
Eileen has her own apartment and manages her private life with help from a visiting aide.
Top and skirt, right?
I've learned a whole lot from staff.
Like what?
Grocery shopping, budgeting, going out places.
What about stress?
But the ¡1 important thing is called stress. It's stress. Oh,
how to handle it?
Yeah.
What are some of the things? What is
Deep
that?
breathing.
Deep breathing. Yeah, because staff needs to do that too sometimes when they work with you.
And
right?
when they get upset.
And does it work?
And it works.
Good.
Stress, stress, go away, come again another day.
It's not a fancy weekend. It's in Colorado Springs, and nobody's going to get really dressed up.
Eileen has guests today. Her parents, Toby and Stan Ehrenberg, have come by to plan a family reunion.
Or you can look on the internet.
Oh yeah, Colorado.com. Put the Pepsi back in the fridge.
6 years ago, Stan and Toby helped create J. Nolan Community Services. Before its supported living program, Toby would have been visiting her daughter in a mental institution.
The life Eileen lives today is one that we could not have dreamed of when she was a child. Not even imagine, not even come close to imagining that she would have her own apartment, that she would have a full-time job, that she would ride public transportation. Programs are not wonderful everywhere, but little by little that will change, and by and large, the next generation of people with autism will take their place in the world like the rest of us, and hopefully the rest of the world will accept them and make accommodations and allow them to become what they can become.
Of autism's many variations, the savant is the most perplexing. In San Diego, Mark Rimland is famous for his many savant skills. He has just illustrated an award-winning children's book about a girl who loses her cat and finds it again.
I signed my name on a bunch of books called The Secret Night World of Cats for people to buy. Yeah, they're supposed to know who drew the pictures for it too, and who wrote the book.
In colors in.
Mark's other savant skills include the ability to tell you the day of the week for any date in any year.
Let's make believe it's 2021 and it's March 15th, 2021. What day would that be?
A Monday.
Like Mark Rimland, Dane Bottino has the uncanny ability to capture the essence of a subject. In Dane's case, very quickly. An average sketch takes about 20 seconds. His art covers the walls of his house, a silent testament to a loss of verbal skills that began at 18 months of age.
We knew right away with Dane that he was not using language. Instead, he would draw us pictures. He changed completely in about 4 or 5 months. He went from beginning language to no language at all. He would move from place to place all day long and would draw from the minute he woke up to when he would just fall over. And he would fall asleep just right where he fell over.
At age 3, Dane fell in love with Dr. Seuss and painted this extraordinary study in perspective. At age 4, he was fascinated by monsters, ghosts, and dinosaurs. And a single trip to the San Diego Zoo inspired scores of animal studies when Dane turned 5. Dane also used his savant skills for the weekly grocery list.
He would draw something like this, and he'd even put the type of yogurt he wanted me to pick up, so it was pretty explanatory. He drew it in third dimension with kind of the rounded cap, and even spelled everything correctly.
One explanation for Dane's savant skills was inspired by brain images called SPECT scans. They show low blood flow to the left side language areas of the brain. To compensate for the deficit, there is double the normal amount of blood flow on the right side and the occipital lobe, a region associated with vision and creativity. Dane's verbal skills are slowly improving through special education. He also studies after school with a specially trained friend, 13-year-old Victoria.
So, an antonym could be good and bad.
Called a peer tutor, she encourages Dane to learn and speak while developing his social skills. In this session, Dane becomes distracted and anxious.
Get the pen. No squeezing. Breathe in. Count to 100 by fives. 5. Dane. 5.
10, 15, 20.
Victoria single-handedly helps Dane recover his concentration through deep breathing and counting exercises.
95, 100. Are you ready? Are you ready to work now?
To work now?
Okay, so fast is the opposite of?
Slow.
After a class, Dane's mom allows him a special treat: access to the kitchen floor with a pen full of washable ink. It's possible that Dane will remain an artist into adulthood. But there's a chance his savant skills will recede as Dane learns to communicate with language.
What I have noticed is that the more involved a savant becomes in the normal society around them, the more socially involved they become, the more normal they become in working with other people, talking with other people, and having wider, more normal interests, the more their savant skills disappear.
Temple Grandin is an expert in two very different fields. Recognized internationally as an authority on livestock handling, Grandin holds a doctorate degree in animal science and teaches at a major university in Colorado. But Temple's other passion is raising public awareness of autism. At mental health conventions across America, she is a sought-after speaker.
The super social people are not the kind of people that are going to design electric power plants, program computers, make great art, do all of the wonderful things that give us culture. And I got to thinking, well, who would have invented the first stone spear way back when we were cavemen? It wouldn't have been the social people up yakking it up around the campfire. It would have been maybe someone a little bit on the autistic spectrum, sitting there in the back of the cave, chipping away at hundreds and hundreds of rocks until he figured out how to make the spear.
The author of two critically acclaimed books on autism, Temple Grandin's expertise comes firsthand. She was born with autism 56 years ago.
Hi, Sam. Hi, this is Temple.
While most autistic children were institutionalized, Temple's parents decided to keep her at home. By age 2, she lost all speech, often flew into severe tantrums, and suffered from hypersensitivity.
Things like the school bell going off, it was like a dentist drill going down my ear. And I found if I sat and rocked, I could shut off the world. sound hurt my ears. Scratchy clothes was like sandpaper just ripping my nerve endings raw. When I was a little kid, I'd sit on the beach and just dribble sand through my hands. I could just be hypnotized by those sort of things.
Through the perseverance of her mother, a speech therapist, and a no-nonsense nanny, Temple slowly made progress.
Since I'm a child of the 50s, we also had structured meals. It wasn't just go and get it when I wanted to. We had to sit at the table and we had to behave. And I wasn't allowed to take my fork and study it. I had to stay tuned in. The speech therapist spent a lot of time with me elongating the consonant. I didn't hear the consonant sounds, like B for ball. And Miss Reynolds, my teacher, would hold up a ball and she'd stretch out the B and she'd go, ba, ba, ball, so my ear would hear them.
Temple's type of autism made it difficult for her to form concepts in her mind by hearing or seeing a word. To make sense of the word dog, for example, Temple had to sort through images of real dogs she had met.
In order to form a concept about what a dog is, when I was a little kid, I had to bring up in my mind all these different pictures of specific dogs that lived in the neighborhood and go, now how did I figure out that a dachshund wasn't a cat? Well, I figured out that every dog, no matter how big he was or how small he was, had the same nose. You know, there's certain common features that every dog had that none of the cats had.
As a teenager, Temple spent a summer vacation on a ranch in Colorado. There she realized she had an unusual affinity for animals.
I know other people that are autistic that are really good with animals. And I think it's because the way they think is sort of more like how the animal thinks. Also, the sensory sensitivities are more like an animal. Animals have extremely sensitive hearing. You know, little things that we don't hear, they will hear.
Temple decided to create a place for herself in the cattle industry. By nature, cattle are frightened by sudden noises and visual distractions. As a result, they stop short as they move through holding facilities like feedlots. Frustrated cattlemen would resort to painful electric prods to get them moving again.
See, on this drawing here, it said,
Temple dedicated herself to finding more humane ways to handle and house livestock. She now designs facilities where cattle move smoothly without being threatened or prodded. Mark Deasing is Temple's business partner.
She made it clear to me that we're responsible for bringing these animals into this world, and it's our responsibility also to see that they have a good life and a painless and fearless death. And that really made sense to me.
Temple's designs allow animals to move in curved, solid-walled passageways that limit frightening sounds and distractions. Grandin works out every minute detail in her mind before a plan is committed to paper.
She does the simulations in her head, and then she just simply sits down and draws what is up there.
Temple can test individual parts, find problems, and fix them in her mind before a facility goes into construction. At this new feedlot, the cattle move smoothly on the way to a squeeze chute where they are inoculated.
I know what it's like to be really anxious. I used to just have terrible panic attacks all the time. I can understand how those cattle feel. It makes me very happy to see them just moving through the facility beautifully.
Today, roughly a third of all cattle in the United States move through humane facilities designed by Temple. At the end of this one lies a squeeze chute, a device that gently restrains an animal while it's vaccinated or branded. As a teenager, Temple decided to see what a mechanical squeeze felt like and discovered the non-human hug calmed her nervous system.
When I was a little kid, I couldn't stand to be touched. I wanted to feel that good feeling of being held, but it was just too overwhelming.
Years later, Temple designed a device she nicknamed the Hug Machine.
When I first made it, I kind of tended to want to pull away from it. But then gradually I got desensitized where I enjoyed the nice feeling of the pressure and sort of being hugged by it. And one thing I'm finding now is I have nicer dreams when I use the squeeze machine.
Hug machines are now in use across the United States, including at the Temple Grandin School in Phoenix. By pulling on a control stick, Seth can determine exactly how much calming pressure he receives. For Seth, a well-meaning hug from another human feels intrusive, but Temple's machine feels just right.
For some children, it's very calming and helps them to be able to organize their internal systems and can even help them in improving their sleep patterns at night.
While her design business is thriving, Temple measures her true success as a teacher. Like her childhood nanny, she keeps her students on a short tether. Temple is Associate Professor of Animal Science at Colorado State University in Fort Collins.
She makes herself so available to her students. She puts her students above even her career, her work. When students call her, she will return a student's call before she'll return a business call. She's funny as a teacher because a college professor who takes attendance and those kind of things threatens to call students' moms and dads and tell them that they're not showing up to class.
Like most high-functioning autistic people, Temple takes an unemotional approach to life. Her world revolves around work, teaching, and non-intimate relationships.
I know that there's some things in my life that are missing, but I've replaced that by making myself extremely good at what I do, by making my life very intellectually complex and interesting. If I didn't have intellectually satisfying work, life wouldn't be worth living.
Her joy that she finds is different than ours. She finds happiness in accomplishments, in her relationships, her friends, when they do well, her students. Those are the kind of things that are important.
I am what I think. I am what I do. Or it seems to me a lot of other people, it's what they feel. I got emotions. I definitely got emotions. Man, when kids teased me in high school, that really hurt. And that caused a lot of temper tantrums and fights. But now that I'm beyond that point, what I think and what I do is my basis of being.
More than 60% of the autistic adults today will need care for the rest of their lives. That statistic will likely fall in the decades ahead as early intervention with new therapies reaches more children.
Joe, do you want to water some for me? Come here.
Meanwhile, the extraordinary demands of today's autistic children are being met by parents who are beyond tears, but not hope.
How can I maximize today so that he'll learn as much as he can and say as much as he can and be as much as he can? And you just have to try to create the optimal environment.
Use what everyone says. Try what everyone says. Try what you read. Try what you find. Never stop trying.
And pay attention to yourself. If you do something that doesn't work, don't keep doing it because it ought to work. Find something different.
Tell the other autistics of America, don't give up. Keep trying.